You shift your weight off the fountain's edge and wander deeper into the heart of the city, where the crowds thicken and the smells get more ambitious. A chalkboard scrawled in charcoal lists today's menu in shaky Latin panis, plebeius, oleum rancidum, and wait for it, garum extra fortis. You pretend to be impressed. Here comes the crunchier side of Roman snacking. Literally. You pass a vendor hunched beside a pile of flat loaves stacked like roof tiles. They're dry cracked and sturdy enough to use as building material. This is your first taste of the infamous panis plebeius bread for the commoners, made with coarse flour, full of everything from bits of chaff to the occasional rock. You break off a piece. It crumbles like old sidewalk chalk and tastes about the same, but you chew dutifully. Everyone around you is doing it. Nearby, a man with 2 teeth and infinite confidence dunks his into a bowl of watered-down vinegar and oil. "Helps with the crunch," he says with a wink. You believe him. You have to. Your molars are negotiating a strike. This, you learn, was survival bread. It wasn't meant to delight, it was meant to fill. Flour was rarely sifted, and contamination with grit or sand wasn't unusual, especially during shortages. Historians still argue whether the Romans actually noticed, or if they just didn't have a better option. And considering a lot of mills were operated by slaves, or even donkeys pulling grindstones, quality control wasn't exactly the top priority. And oh, the flour games. Some bakers stretched their flour with chalk powder, or ground beans, more profit, less nutrition. Roman food laws tried to crack down on it, but enforcement was sketchy. Honestly, this loaf might have been baked this morning, or in the time of Augustus. Either way, it's now lodged between your molars, so that's your life now. You look for relief, and you find it in the pungent glory of garum. Remember that fermented fish sauce from earlier? This one is the extra fortis kind. A small amphora sits at the end of the counter with a ladle sticking out. You pour just a drop onto your bread. It soaks through like dark ink and smells, how do we say this, like the end of summer in a fish market. Still, it adds salt and depth. Kind of. You notice some locals dabbing it on with what looks like reeds. Classy. You, however, just dip a crust directly. A mistake. Your sinuses revolt. Fish sauce in Rome wasn't just a condiment, it was the condiment. It flavored stews, vegetables, even desserts. The poor use the dregs like a chunky paste of fish bones and skin. The rich, they shelled out for the top-shelf stuff aged in the sun, triple-strained, bottled in fancy jars. Yes, there were garum snobs. You're not one of them. Yet, to your left, a child carries a basket of olives. She offers you one. You bite down. It's intensely salty, slightly bitter with a whisper of wild herbs. This one's marinated in vinegar and stored in clay pots the Roman way. Olives were everywhere, eaten whole, pressed into oil, smeared onto bread. They were a staple. Even the pits had value crushed for fuel, repurposed into makeshift dice or tossed at annoying politicians. You munch thoughtfully as you stroll past another food stand, barley porridge or pulse simmering in a pot. The vendor sprinkles herbs into it, thyme and a bit of cheese. It looks beige. Tastes like soggy oatmeal having an existential crisis. Still, it's warm and it fills your stomach. You overhear a man arguing over how long to boil lentils. His friend insists adding onions ruins the texture. A third chimes in with, "My mother adds fig vinegar, and she lived to 50, which in Roman years is practically immortal." They invite you to sit. You crouch on a worn bench, the bowl hot in your hands. A breeze carries dust across the table, and you realize this chatter, this flavorless gruel, this heat is daily life. The conversation drifts to Roman politics, always dramatic. Someone jokes about Emperor Nero's latest statue. You ask how much he eats in a day. "Enough to bankrupt Greece," someone quips. They offer you more porridge. You politely decline, rubbing your now bloated stomach. And just when you think you're done for the day, someone hands you a little wedge of something dark and sticky. "Ficus carica," he says with a grin. It's a fig cake. Dried figs mashed and pressed into a thick slab. You take a bite. Sweet, chewy, comforting. This was the Roman version of a snack bar. Portable, dense, questionably shelf-stable. Some versions even included crushed nuts and honey. Others were soaked in wine or vinegar for that tangy edge. Rich families had them wrapped in grape leaves. You eat yours out of a scrap of linen. Still delicious. Across the street, a boy sells cups of sour wine mixed with herbs. It's barely alcoholic and served in cracked pottery. You sip. It's sharp, medicinal, oddly refreshing. And just like that, your belly is full of everything from vinegar porridge to salted olives, and your mind is drifting. But not so fast. You step around a corner and stop. There it is, a street mural, faded but vivid. A painting of a table loaded with fish bread, cheese fruit, and a giant wine jug. It's graffiti. Roman graffiti often celebrated food, joked about overeating, or cursed out bad bakers. This one reads, Panem bonum quaere, sed cave falsum farinam. Seek good bread, but beware fake flour. You smile. Some things never change. You wonder on the taste of fig cake, still clinging to your teeth like a clingy ex who doesn't know when to say goodbye. The street curves toward a row of stalls that look suspiciously sticky. The air here is thick, like walking into a cloud made of warm sugar and childhood regret. You've entered the dessert district, and Roman dessert. It was less about subtlety and more about how many bee corpses can we fit in this vat of honey. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Roasted nuts, melted sugar, a whisper of something toasted. Maybe sesame, maybe thatch roof. A vendor smiles and offers you something glistening on a wooden skewer. You take it because saying no in Rome is not an option and immediately regret your life choices. It's hot, it's sticky. It's a date stuffed with chopped walnuts and dipped in honey so thick it strings like mozzarella. The sweetness sucker punches your molars. You blink twice and chew carefully, fully expecting one of your fillings to give up and walk out. These sweet treats, known as dulcia domestica, weren't fancy. No soufflés, no millefeuille, just fruit nuts, flour, cheese, and more honey than a Winnie the Pooh fever dream. Romans believed honey was medicinal, romantic, and possibly divine. They put it on everything. Sometimes even fish. Because why not? You step over a puddle, possibly wine, possibly something less divine, and drift toward a clay oven where another vendor is baking what looks like little fritters. He flips them with a flat piece of bronze. They sizzle in oil, puff up, and are quickly tossed into a clay bowl and doused in, you guessed it, more honey. Globuli, he says. Goat cheese and semolina. You nod, pick one up, and the oil immediately coats your fingers. You take a bite. It's crispy warm, slightly sour from the cheese, and so sweet your eyelid twitches involuntarily. It tastes like carnival food invented by someone with a grudge against insulin, but it's comforting. Food in ancient Rome wasn't just about flavor. It was ritual. It was status. It was comfort in a city where things were always changing and frequently burning down. A woman passes with a basket of what look like donuts round golden dusted with poppy seeds. She's humming. You ask what they are. She says scriblete. Fried dough sometimes filled with honey cheese. Romans didn't have sugar like we do. Refined cane, sugar wasn't a thing, but they had fruit syrup, grape must, and always, honey. You try one. The dough is soft inside, crisp outside. The poppy seeds stick to your lips. You feel like a well-fed, slightly sticky demigod. A child next to you is licking his fingers after devouring what looks like a cake wrapped in fig leaves. You ask what it was. His father answers placenta. You freeze. He laughs. Not that placenta. It's a layered pastry. Cheese, flour, honey baked in sheets. The name came first. The confusion came later. You let out a slow breath and silently thank the gods for language drift. Nearby, another man is selling candied rose petals. You pass not because you're not curious, but because your stomach is starting to gurgle in Latin. That's the thing about Roman desserts. They weren't light finales to meals. They were full-on sweet meals in their own right. And the people ate them in the street, in the bathhouses, even during business meetings. Ever tried negotiating land taxes while chewing a honeyed fig the Romans did, with a straight face? Still, you can't help but admire their enthusiasm. Sweetness was rare and expensive in the ancient world. To get honey, you had to brave bee stings, climb trees, or barter with weird forest people. So when Romans used it, they didn't hold back. It was poured, smeared, baked, boiled, and sometimes just spooned directly into the mouth. You sit down on a stone bench beside a half-empty amphora and wipe your fingers on your tunic, which at this point has become a patchwork of snack stains. You glance up at a painted sign on the wall, a grinning baker holding a dripping ladle. Beneath it, Dulcia, Omnia, Vincit sweets, conquer all. A man sits beside you and offers a kind of brittle seeds and honey pressed into thin shards. "My wife's recipe," he says. You nod politely. It tastes like the granola bar of the gods. There's something oddly peaceful about this sticky corner of Rome. No shouts, no fire, just contented munching and the occasional bee buzzing dangerously close to your ear. You wonder aloud if any of this stuff was healthy. A nearby philosopher with a bushy beard answers without being asked, "All food is medicine when taken with restraint," he says. Then he bites into a bowl of fried cheese and honey and mutters, "But sometimes medicine needs to taste like joy." Historians still argue whether these sweets were everyday fare or saved for festivals. Some point to massive honey imports and inscriptions of baker guilds as proof that desserts were a regular part of Roman life. Others say they were luxury items, a treat for the few. But here now, on this syrup-glazed street corner, it doesn't really matter. You lean back, eyes half closed, the sugar haze softening the edges of the city. You listen to the slow hiss of frying oil, the buzz of a bee, and the laugh of a child as syrup drips down his chin. You think maybe you will survive this after all. Your fingers are still sticky from honey as you drift into a quieter street where the morning sun slants through columns and the city starts to stretch its limbs. You catch the smell of wine, yes, already. Because in Rome, wine wasn't a luxury. It was practically a breakfast item. You hear clinking pottery before you see it, a row of stone benches circling a fountain, each occupied by laborers cradling terracotta cups. One of them waves you over points to an amphora and says, "Don't worry, it's cut with water." We're not that barbaric. You sit down and someone hands you a modest pour of red wine. It's sharp, a little sour, and very, very thin. Romans rarely drank wine straight. That was considered uncivilized. It had to be diluted sometimes with warm water, sometimes cold. Occasionally with spices, herbs, or things that made it glow faintly in the dark. You take a sip. It's oddly refreshing, like bitter grape tea. "Breakfast of champions," the man next to you grins. He dips a chunk of barley bread into his wine and pops it into his mouth like it's the most normal thing in the world. You follow suit. It's chewy dry and improved only slightly by the wine soak. Still, it gets the job done. Romans believed wine was not just for pleasure, but for balance. They drank it all day, old, young, rich, poor. Even children had watered wine. Historians still argue whether this was truly safe or just a very sophisticated way to ensure your toddler sleeps through the night. You eye a nearby stand where a woman is selling boiled spelt porridge by the bowl. She sprinkles in grated cheese and something greenish, maybe herbs, maybe mold. She ladles it into a shallow clay dish and slides it across the counter to a customer who looks both grateful and mildly terrified. Spelt and ancient wheat relative was everywhere. Made into gruel, porridge, flatbread, and even dumplings. Mixed with honey for dessert, fermented for weird proto-beer, or just boiled and salted for a meal that really challenged your jaw strength. You get a small dish mostly out of peer pressure. It's warm and filling and sticks to your ribs like gossip in a Roman bathhouse. Down the street, a man in a toga, definitely too clean for this neighborhood, holds a small meeting in front of a bakery. They sip wine and nibble sesame rolls as they talk trade routes and grain prices. You catch a few words. Egypt, Alexandria, spoiled shipment. Looks like someone's bread isn't rising this month. The bakery behind them operates like a furnace. A young man, shirtless and flour-dusted, shovels loaves in and out of a dome-shaped oven. He hums as he works. The loaves are flat, round, and uneven. No two look alike. One even has a stamp pressed into the crust letters, maybe a symbol. You ask about it. The woman beside you answers bread stamps, shows the bakery. Also helps avoid fraud. You blink. Ancient QR codes, basically. Some stamps marked imperial bakeries. Others displayed guild logos or even religious phrases. In a city where food riots weren't rare, bread had to be traceable. You take a roll and sniff. Nutty. Yeasty. You bite in. The crust is dense, the inside faintly sour. But it's real. It tastes like earth and fire. Breakfast in Rome wasn't a defined event. No one was making pancakes and orange juice. Instead, people grabbed what they could, bread, olives, leftovers, washed it down with wine or vinegar water, and moved on. You pass a man brushing crumbs off his tunic and muttering about a senatorial bellyache. Apparently, someone had too much garum last night. You chuckle and continue down the alley where the smell of toasted grain hangs heavy in the air. A donkey lumbers by its cart filled with barley sacks. The driver nods to you and says, "For the polls, same every morning." You reach the end of the street and find a quiet square shaded by old fig trees. A few people sit at a stone table playing a game that looks like tic-tac-toe but with more yelling. One of them peels an apple with a knife that's seen better days. He slices off a piece and offers it to you. You hesitate. Fruit in Rome could be wonderful or fermented beyond hope. This one crisp. Tart. A little dusty, but aren't we all? Romans didn't have access to every fruit we enjoy today. No bananas, no pineapples, no oranges. But they had plenty figs, grapes, pomegranates, apples, pears, and even berries in the countryside. In the markets, dried fruit was king, easy to store, sweeter to taste, and when soaked in wine or vinegar, that was breakfast and dessert. The man you're sitting with pulls a flask from his belt and uncorks it. The smell of spiced wine drifts up. Cinnamon, maybe, or something pretending to be cinnamon. He takes a sip and passes it to you. You taste warm fruit herbs and a mild tang. You make this, you ask. He nods. My mother's recipe. Good for the bones. Also terrible decisions. You laugh. A group of boys runs past with handfuls of nuts likely stolen. The vendor down the road shouts after them, shaking his fist. May your grapes turn sour, he yells, which is possibly the Roman version of flipping someone off. You settle back onto the bench, the sun crawling higher across the sky. Your stomach is full of barley, sour wine and fruit, and for a moment you forget that most of these foods were made in communal ovens, carried in unwashed hands, and stored in pots older than the calendar. You wonder if you'd lived in Rome, would this be your daily life? Quick wine, fast bread, arguing about cheese with your neighbors. Probably. And honestly, it doesn't sound so bad. You push away from the bench, one hand, still nursing the spiced wine flask, past your way. The flavors cling to your tongue, warm, fruity, vaguely medicinal, while the rest of Rome calls out with the hiss of oil and the pop of firewood. The alley you follow next is narrower, the stones shinier, worn down by generations of sandals, leather boots, and the occasional chariot wheel. Then it hits you the unmistakable smell of meat sizzling over open flame. You round a corner and immediately stop. There in front of you is a man with arms like overstuffed sausages standing behind a brazier. He's turning skewers over glowing coals with practiced flicks of his wrist. The smell, heaven. If heaven was smoky, oily, and slightly aggressive. You inch closer. The skewers glisten fatty lamb chunks, garlic-stuffed pork, and something you hope is chicken or pigeon. You're honestly not sure. The vendor points a charred stick at you. You look hungry. You want this one, it's barely burned. You nod. He slaps a skewer onto a square of coarse bread and hands it over. You take a bite. It's salty, charred, smoky in that I will smell like this for a week kind of way. And it's perfect. A few drops of garum glaze drip down the bread, mixing with the juices. Your face is probably a mess, but you don't care. Grilled meat was a street favorite. Affordable in small quantities, especially off cuts or leftover bits. The rich might dine on boar and roast pheasant in polished halls, but down here it was skewers, sausages, and grilled scraps, and it was good. Next door, another vendor is doing something a little more dramatic. A round of cheese, probably goat, is perched in a shallow pan over open flame. As you watch it, puffs cracks, then bursts into a small controlled fireball. The crowd gasps, then claps. He grins and scrapes the melted cheese onto toasted bread with herbs and a dash of vinegar. You take a sample. The cheese is smoky, salty, a little sour, and somehow tastes like confidence. Romans loved cheese. They had over a dozen varieties, hard, soft, fresh-aged, sheep, goat, and sometimes cow. It was often eaten with honey wine or herbs. Rich tables might serve cheese shaped like animals. Poor folks just wanted it melted. There's even an old Roman cookbook, Apicius, that includes recipes for seasoned cheese sauces, cheese-stuffed buns, and even cheesecake. Though scholars still argue whether the cheesecake was baked chilled or just Roman for let's throw everything together and hope for the best. Across the way, a young woman sells small pies from a wooden cart. She calls them a felai, and when you ask what's in them, she just shrugs and says, meat. Maybe fish, maybe not meat. You take a bite. It's flaky, oily, and probably a little bit of everything, but tasty. These were Rome's junk food joints, loud, messy, and everywhere. Thermopolia, those stone counters with sunken jars, lined the streets. They kept food hot with built-in fires beneath. Patrons stood, lean-talked politics or gladiators, and got a quick meal on the go. And yes, food safety was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. One vendor wipes his hands on his tunic, which is clearly moonlighting as a grease rag. You try not to look directly at it. A man near you crunches into what looks like a sausage wrapped in grape leaves. He nods in approval. Filled with pine nuts and pepper, he says. And maybe rabbit. You pretend you didn't hear the question mark. It wasn't unusual for meat to be stretched, blended with breadcrumbs, herbs, or wine. Even blood. Romans made blood pudding long before it was cool in modern gastropubs. The vendor flips another skewer, and a burst of flame leaps up. The crowd laughs. Someone throws a copper coin onto the counter. You wander past more stalls. There's one selling eggs, hard-boiled and dusted with cumin and salt. Another has a bubbling stew pot where chickpeas swirl lazily with bits of onion and pepper. A man near the pot dunks a wedge of bread and eats it with a spoon carved from bone. Then something new. You spot a brazier where someone's roasting something round. At first you think it's a small loaf, but then you realize it's a stuffed fig wrapped in thin slices of meat, glazed in wine and speared on a stick. It's decadent, unnecessary, and probably illegal in 6 provinces. You take a bite. It's sweet, salty, and smoky, everything colliding at once in your mouth. This is what a food empire tastes like. You lean against a column to rest. Your stomach hums like a Roman lyre, full of smoke spice and wild guesses. The sound of the crowd fades just enough for you to hear 2 men arguing over which vendor makes the best sausage. One swears by Marcus near the baths. The other insists on Flavius by the bridge. They nearly come to blows before settling it with another round of food. That's how it was. Food was daily democratic and competitive. Everyone had an opinion and nobody agreed. Which garum was best, which bakery used real flour, which vendor's skewers didn't give you the shakes. And through it all, the city kept eating, day after day. Fire, smoke, salt, and stories. A dog trots by with half a sausage in its mouth. You think about chasing it. You don't, you're too full. You rub your stomach as you make your way down another winding alley, the scent of roasted meat still clinging to your clothes. For a moment, things are quiet, just the shuffle of feet on stone, the creak of a wooden cart wheel and the faint sound of a lute being tuned in the distance. Then, something earthy, herby, damp. You wrinkle your nose and glance around. There, on your right, A stone courtyard with low walls where an old man squats beside what looks like a shallow, muddy pen. Inside it, dozens of slow, slimy creatures clinging to the walls, like escape wasn't their strong suit. Snails. "Welcome to my snail farm," the man says proudly. His arms spread like he's unveiling the Colosseum. You blink. You're not sure what you were expecting, but it wasn't a gastropod petting zoo. These aren't just any snails. These are fat, carefully fed, hand-picked Roman delicacies. They've been nourished on milk bran and sometimes wine-soaked leaves to fatten them up and cleanse their insides. Apparently, the more pampered the snail, the better the flavor. You ask how they're cooked. He grins. Oh, roasted. Fried. Sometimes drowned in honey and vinegar. You're not sure if you heard that right, but you nod respectfully like a proper visitor to the snail spa. Romans loved snails, especially the upper class. They were considered elegant, slimy symbols of sophistication. There were even dedicated farms across the empire. Some historians still argue whether snail cuisine originated from the countryside or was imported from Gaul, where apparently everything was fair game once it moved slowly enough. You're offered one roasted and skewered, topped with a little garlic butter and thyme. You try it. It's chewy, salty, slightly nutty. Kind of like a mushroom's second cousin, and you're not entirely mad about it. But the snails aren't the only exotic dish in town. You follow your nose to a nearby tent where something pink and suspiciously feathered is being prepared behind a curtain. A wealthy woman steps out, dabbing her lips with a cloth. "Flamingo tongues," she says nonchalantly, as if this is just Tuesday. They serve them fried with a touch of honey vinegar. She tosses a coin to the cook and floats away. You blink again. That's the thing with elite Roman cuisine. It went from charmingly rustic to weight. Did you say what? Real fast. In high society, the stranger the food, the higher the status. Flamingo tongues were a delicacy. Ostrich brains too. Moray eels, so's udders. Peacock stew, if it was rare, expensive, or hard to catch someone in a toga, probably demanded it on a gold plate. You creep closer and peek into the tent. Inside, a cook is carefully slicing into something pink and tender with surgical precision. The flamingo tongue. Yes, it's real, is tiny compared to the rest of the bird. There's a pan of them sizzling in oil next to skewers of peacock thigh and tiny songbirds wrapped in grape leaves. You shake your head. Romans didn't just eat food. They performed it. Elite banquets weren't about nourishment. They were about theater. Guests reclined on couches dressed in silks, their fingers dripping with sauce, while servers paraded in dish after ridiculous dish. One record even describes a roast pig served with fake feathers, its belly sliced open at the table to reveal dozens of cooked thrushes flying out. A culinary magic trick. Historians still argue whether this was an actual dish or just a really good metaphor for Roman excess. You imagine sitting at one of those feasts, reclining sideways arm deep in honey-roasted dormice, pretending not to notice the senator across the table popping sparrow hearts like popcorn. But for now, you're back on the street. A man with a basket passes by, offering you what looks like a meatball. You accept it, and he says, "Stuffed sow's udder. Lightly boiled, then roasted." You stop chewing for a second, then decide if it tastes good. Don't ask questions. The meat is tender, slightly sweet, and heavily seasoned. You wash it down with watered wine and pretend you didn't hear the word udder. You keep walking. A boy crouches beside a basin, removing fish guts from a long eel. Another man pounds spices with a mortar the size of a toddler. Every few feet, someone is baking, frying, boiling, pickling, or just glaring at something until it cooks out of fear. That's the core of it. Roman food was wild, imaginative, and unapologetic. Sometimes brilliant, sometimes awful. Often both in the same bite. You remember the snail farmer's pride, the woman with her flamingo tongue, the cook who lit his cheese on fire just for the show of it. It wasn't just about what they ate. It was how they ate it. With flair, with drama, and occasionally with moral ambiguity. You can still feel the warm oil from that stuffed sow's udder clinging to the back of your throat as you stumble toward a quieter corner of the forum. You tell yourself you've had enough strange meats for one day. You whisper it like a vow. But Rome isn't finished with you yet, because just beyond the shadow of a worn marble statue, possibly a half-eroded Neptune or someone's very optimistic cousin, is a vendor with a cage. And inside the cage, dormice. Tiny, fuzzy, twitchy-nosed. They blink at you like they're fully aware they're next on the menu. You freeze. The vendor doesn't. Want one, he says, already reaching for a plump one that's been fed on acorns and dried fruit, stuffed with herbs and nuts, roasted in a clay pot. Best you'll find this side of the Palatine. You don't answer in time. He hands you a waxed paper cone, well-okay parchment, with a hot, golden-brown dormouse curled inside like a crunchy secret. It's been scored across the back, its belly stuffed with ground pepper, crushed pine nuts, and yes, honey. You stare at it. It stares at nothing. You bite. It's oddly tender. The skin is crisp, the meat somewhere between poultry and rabbit. The stuffing is savory sweet and aggressively aromatic. It tastes far better than your modern ethics are prepared to admit. In ancient Rome, dormice were a delicacy, especially the edible variety bred specifically for eating. Rich households kept them in special terracotta jars called gleraria, where they were fattened in cozy darkness until they achieved ideal snackability. They weren't street food for the masses, but in some parts of the empire and at the right stall you could find one roasted glazed and ready to go. Because nothing says civilized society like deep-frying rodents and stuffing them with pine nuts. Historians still argue whether dormice were eaten regularly or saved for special occasions, but archaeological finds suggest they weren't uncommon. Bones have been discovered in elite trash pits and middle-class cook fires. One thing's certain, Romans didn't waste time on food they didn't enjoy, even if it squeaked. You finish the dormouse, wiping your fingers on a linen square handed to you by a surprisingly courteous bystander. You thank him. He nods like this sort of exchange is normal, which for Rome it absolutely is. A child runs by with a skewer of what might be lizard or just very thin chicken. He's laughing. His mother is trying to bargain over a tray of what looks like candied locusts. She samples one, doesn't flinch. It's not about shock value here. It's about what works, what fills the belly, what flavors make your tongue perk up after a day of walking in sandals and ducking chamber pots tossed from windows. You pass another stall and smell it before you see it burnt rosemary thyme, maybe some fennel. A spit rotates slowly above glowing embers, and on it, more dormice. But these ones are special. The vendor explains they're festival dormice drenched in fermented fish sauce, rolled in wheat crumbs and cooked until golden. Served with a date and an attitude. You respectfully decline. One dormouse per day is plenty. Instead, you reach for a different treat, a small pastry shell filled with cheese honey and what might be mint. It's sweet, creamy, and blessedly rodent-free. You close your eyes and enjoy the moment. Even your stomach seems to sigh in relief. It's easy to forget here in the heart of the empire that food was also about status. What you ate told the world where you belonged. Dormice prestige, lentils and barley peasantry. Spiced eel tongue wrapped in gold leaf, literal emperor behavior. But now and then, the lines blurred. People got curious, adventurous, hungry enough to try something that twitched a few hours earlier. You watch an older man chew contentedly on a roast onion stuffed with chopped fish and herbs. He eats it slowly, nodding at the flavors. You ask if it's good. Better than dormice, he replies. But don't tell my wife that. She raises them. You nod solemnly. Secrets are sacred here. As the sun begins to dip, you spot a young woman with a tray of dried fruits. She offers you a honeyed fig and a piece of candied quince. The fig is dense, earthy, and almost jam-like. The quince tart and sticky like a Roman fruit roll-up with ambition. You're full of flavors, textures, and things you never thought you'd voluntarily chew. roasted dormouse, glazed snail, flaming cheese, stuffed onions. You walk on slightly dazed and vaguely proud. Because you've done it. You've eaten like a Roman. And you probably won't survive this. But hey, what a way to go. You stagger forward, half drunk on flavor, half weighed down by roasted rodent, and it occurs to you Romans didn't just eat. They soaked, they steamed, they gossiped, and somewhere between scrubbing and scandal, they snacked. You follow a trail of chatter and warm mist to the threshold of a grand thermae, one of the many Roman public bathhouses scattered across the city. The doorway is flanked by statues with blank eyes and even blanker abs. You hesitate, but the heat and laughter spilling out pull you in. Inside, the air is thick with steam and cologne-like oils. Bare feet slap on marble. Robed men recline on stone benches, gossiping, arguing, and occasionally calling for food, like it's room service if your room came with 200 other sweaty strangers. You drift through the warm tepidarium, trying not to stare at anyone for too long, and make your way to a small courtyard tucked off to the side. That's where the real action is. There's a modest bakery here. Not grand, not gilded, just a simple brick oven, a flour-dusted slab, and a line of people trailing out like Roman-style Starbucks. You blend in, pressing forward until you're close enough to see the goods. Panis secundarius, wheat loaves with uneven crusts, charred on one edge, soft on the other. Panis siligineus, the finer, whiter bread, definitely for the wealthy or the very lucky. And Panis niger, dark heavy, barely risen. Probably last week's. You pick a round loaf stamped with a symbol, maybe a laurel wreath, maybe a very confused fish. Roman bakers often used bread stamps to mark where the loaf came from, who made it, and sometimes which batch it was. Quality assurance in edible form. You bite in, crusty, airy, just the right amount of chew. A man next to you dips his in olive oil, nods to himself, then leans over and says, "You know he bakes for the magistrate, right? That's why the crust's so proud." You smile and chew. A few feet away, another man is selling sesame rolls panis alexandrinus, a nod to Alexandria, where sesame was prized like gold. He hands you one, wrapped in linen. The seeds fall everywhere, but you don't care. It's warm and aromatic, a cross between a pretzel and a hug. This bathhouse bakery isn't just a convenience, it's a tradition. Many thermae had them. You couldn't just soak and sweat without a snack or two, and these little rolls of sesame and salt made the rounds between hot plunges and cold gossip. Beside the oven, a woman sells date pastries dolce. She slices one open to show the dense fruit filling and waves the knife with flair. Made with palm honey and love, she says. You believe her. And the palm honey, possibly not the love. You take one bite in. It's rich. Sticky, slightly spicy. You chew slowly, savoring the contrast of soft fruit and crisp crust, while the murmur of voices rises around you. Then, just as you're dusting crumbs off your tunic, you overhear it. Did you hear what Livia said to that centurion's wife? That's your cue. You turn toward a trio of bath-goers deep in scandal analysis. They're sharing a small bowl of fried chickpeas and whispering like priests at a temple slander session. Romans didn't just gossip in baths, they thrived on it. They plotted, brag-schemed, and flirted while wrapped in towels and eating sesame rolls. If food was fuel, scandal was the dessert. You eavesdrop without guilt. Everyone's doing it. The chickpeas get passed around and someone offers you one. It's crunchy, seasoned with cumin and sea salt. Delicious. Salty like the gossip. A nearby vendor hawks honey cakes in the shape of fish. He claims they ward off bad luck and bad breath. You're skeptical, but intrigued. You buy one. It's soft, syrupy, and clearly designed to stick in your molars until next Saturnalia. But the best part, you don't even notice when someone walks by with a tray of roasted figs and sliced goat cheese, because you're too busy listening to a very animated man describing how a senator's wig fell off mid-banquet. He mimes the motion. Breadcrumbs fly. Romans lived for this. Baths weren't just for cleaning, they were for eating, talking, scheming, and showing off. Food was woven into the experience. Small, portable, shareable bites. Breads, nuts, fruits. Little dishes passed hand to hand like currency. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse snacks were brought in by vendors or sold by the thermae themselves. Some suggest government-sponsored bathhouses even had their own bakeries attached, especially in larger cities. Others think vendors just followed the steam and saw an opportunity. You sip a cup of warm, diluted wine from a pottery mug someone shoved into your hands. You don't ask where it came from. You just raise it to your lips and toast the gossip gods. Then you lean back against a sun-warmed wall, belly full of bread cheeks flushed from steam and eyes half closed from carbohydrate euphoria. You've had sesame rolls, honey cakes, fried chickpeas, and bathhouse gossip more flavorful than half the empire's condiments. You're clean, you're fed, you're gloriously eavesdropped. And just as you're about to doze off, someone shouts, "Fresh loaves, straight from the oven." Naturally, you get up. Because in Rome, there's always room for one more roll. You emerge from the bathhouse, with steam still curling around your ears and sesame seeds clinging to your tunic like confetti after a very salty parade. The sun has climbed higher now, and the smell of vinegar stings your nose before your eyes even register what's next. Ahead of you is a stall that looks like a mad science experiment. Jars line every surface, glass, clay, even some metal, each stuffed with things you can't quite identify. Liquids shimmer in shades of gold, green and brown. Inside, slippery vegetables, fish bits, olives, eels, grapes, capers, herbs, and what may or may not be a lizard. Welcome to the Roman deli. And when you see the man behind the stall pick up a wriggling eel and drop it into a brine-filled tank, you realize this is not your average corner sandwich shop. He grins, holding up a jar. "Pickled lamb tongue," he says proudly. Still warm. You blink. Romans loved preserving their food. Not out of a quirky obsession with fermentation, but because they had to. No refrigeration, no microwaves. Just salt, vinegar, oil, honey, or a desperate hope that mold equals flavor. You step closer, inspecting what might be salted mushrooms in a dark green oil. The vendor opens the jar, and the aroma smacks you like a sea breeze, if the sea had been left in the sun a bit too long. Still, you dip a piece of flatbread into the oil. It's sharp, earthy, tangy. Not bad, not great, definitely memorable. He hands you a skewer of something gelatinous. "Jellied fish skin," he says cheerfully. "With coriander." You chew slowly. The texture is like chewing regret wrapped in seasoning, but it oddly grows on you. Romans pickled everything: eels, olives, cucumbers, onions, fish eggs. They salted meats, smoked hams, cured sausages, and stored fruits in jars of wine or honey. One preserved dish de frutum was a concentrated grape syrup used to flavor or preserve fruits and even meats. Think of it as Roman ketchup, but without the tomatoes. Or the dignity. A child wanders past you, holding a lump of salted cheese and gnawing it like a chewy toy. You briefly consider doing the same. Behind the main stall, a woman is pouring a thick syrup over a plate of figs. She tells you it's been reduced over hours, mixed with vinegar and fennel. Helps keep them through winter, she says, and sweetens the mood. You take a bite of one, it's tender and vinegary, and leaves your mouth puckered like a kiss from a very judgmental aunt. You wander toward another table where strips of dried meat hang like wind chimes. A vendor slices one off and offers it. Boar. Smoked in olive wood, he says. You chew. It's smoky, chewy, and suspiciously peppery. Probably to hide the fact that it's older than some buildings. You ask how long it keeps. He shrugs. Depends. Long enough for soldiers, short enough to still have teeth. Fair. There's a kind of culinary pride in this stall. Nothing is wasted. Everything is transformed. Rotten becomes fermented. Tough becomes brined. A fish you wouldn't trust raw becomes the highlight of a sandwich if Romans had sandwiches, which they sort of didn't. Historians still argue whether all these preservation methods were for convenience, necessity, or taste. Some point to Rome's enormous trade networks and storage facilities as proof they could afford the luxury of choice. Others believe pickling and salting were survival strategies, how to make food last in a world without refrigerators and with far too many festivals where you might forget what day it is. You chew on a vinegary egg, probably quail dusted in ash and herbs. It's oddly good, like deviled eggs from another dimension. A nearby man is scooping preserved fish paste onto his bread and humming. You notice he uses his thumb to press the paste into place. You follow suit. It feels strange, intimate, like your fingers are part of the meal, which in Rome they pretty much were. Spoons existed, yes, knives too. But fingers were the real MVPs of ancient dining. You move to the far end of the deli, where clay pots are bubbling over low fires. A stew is simmering, vinegar lentils, garlic, maybe lamb, maybe just a well-seasoned rumor. You take a ladleful. It's sharp, hearty warming. The vinegar cuts through the fat like a Roman senator through a buffet line. You sigh, sip again, and suddenly understand. This is food made to last, to be shared, to linger. It's pungent, preserved, and unashamed. And just as you're wiping your hands on your sleeve, the vendor lifts a sealed jar from under the counter. He cracks it open. A hiss of trapped air escapes. "Salted flamingo legs," he says. You don't even flinch. You've changed. You dip your bread in the brine just to see. It's pink. Surprisingly tender, a little smoky, a little wild. And with that, you take a deep breath of vinegar-tinged air, straighten your tunic, and walk back into the Roman sun. Because in this city, you've learned one very specific truth. If it can be pickled, it probably already has been. You stroll along the avenue, your hands still tingling from vinegar and salt, your stomach trying to file a complaint, but your nose is already chasing another trail. This time, it's the warm, dusty scent of flour mingled with smoke and the faintest hint of protest. Ahead of you stands a massive pistrinum, a Roman bakery, and it's anything but peaceful. The crowd is loud, flustered. A few men are waving loaves like weapons. A woman is shouting about unfair weights, and a skinny, flour-dusted teenager is trying not to cry behind a sack of spelt. You, of course, edge closer. The bakery itself is impressive stone walls blackened from years of fire, a pair of rotating millstones powered by a donkey tethered out back, and a giant domed oven that looks like it could double as emergency housing. You can smell the crust from 50 feet away. Bread here isn't just food. It's politics. And as you lean in, it becomes clear this isn't your average line for breakfast carbs. It's a protest, a real shouting, finger-pointing bread riot. The issue: bread stamps. You glance at the loaves. Each one bears a pressed seal, some with names, some with symbols, some so squished you'd need a historian with a magnifying glass and a caffeine habit to decode them. Turns out in Rome, bread stamping wasn't just branding, it was accountability. Loaves were stamped with the name of the bakery, sometimes the baker, and occasionally the recipient, if the bread was state-subsidized. See, in a city where over a third of the population relied on the Annona, Rome's grain dole bread wasn't just nourishment, it was survival. The government handed out grain or bread rations, and bakers were responsible for turning that into loaves. Cheating that could get you exiled, or worse, fined. Someone in the crowd shouts that a batch of loaves weighed less than they should. Another yells that someone's removed the stamp and passed off old bread as fresh. You realize that under all the shouting, you're witnessing the ancient equivalent of a food safety scandal. Historians still argue whether bread riots were common or just loud exceptions, but there's no doubt that grain and bread were strategic levers of power. Control the grain, control the people. And emperors knew it. Bread and circuses, they said, panem et circenses. Keep people fed and entertained, and they won't notice the taxes, or the corruption, or the fact that the empire is unraveling faster than your tunic hem. You manage to snag a warm loaf from a side window handed out by a sweating assistant who seems deeply grateful you're not screaming. It's soft, dusted with flour, and stamped with a sunburst pattern. You take a bite, crusty, a little sour, still steaming inside. Beside you, a woman mutters, "Better than last week." That one was half rocks. She takes a swig from a clay jug of watered-down wine and offers you some. You nod. Bread and wine. Classic pairing. As you chew, you notice a wall mural faded with age. It shows a smiling baker handing a loaf to a soldier with the words, "Pistrinum Fidelis," the loyal bakery. You wonder how loyal they were when the bread ran thin. You continue through the back alley past barrels of grain and the occasional rat who looks like it pays rent. A younger boy is sweeping up flour from between the stones and tossing it back into a sack. You try not to think about that too hard. Back toward the main street, another baker, this one clearly less involved in drama, stands at a mobile cart, slicing hot bread open and stuffing it with dried olives and pickled onions. He sprinkles crushed coriander on top and sells each piece for a couple of asses. You buy one. This, you decide, is peak Roman street food. Portable, flavorful, slightly acidic and designed to be eaten while dodging an angry mule. As you eat, you overhear two bakers arguing about Emmer versus Spelt. One insists Spelt bakes fluffier. The other claims Emmer has better flavor. A third joins in shouting, "It depends on the mill, you fools." They all glare at each other like the fate of the empire depends on their grain of choice, and honestly, it kind of does. Grain shipments were a logistical miracle. Wheat from Egypt, North Africa, Sicily, all transported by sea and river, stored in granaries and guarded like treasure. If a shipment was late, the city could starve. If the grain spoiled, there were riots. If the emperor raised prices, you got chaos. Glorious sesame-covered chaos. That's why bakers formed guilds. Unions, in a way. There were rules, quotas, even punishments. In some cases, bakers were legally forbidden from quitting their job. Imagine being sentenced to a lifetime of 3 a.m. dough prep and trying not to punch your apprentice for under-kneading again. You spot a worn inscription on a nearby stone wall. It reads, "Here baked Gaius Maximus, loyal to the state light of the oven." You nod solemnly. Gaius knew the weight of flour and public expectation. You finish your stuffed loaf brushing away crumbs. A dog follows you for 2 blocks. You give it a crust. Fair is fair. And as you round the corner, full of stamped bread and flour, politics, you think this was more than food. This was economy, identity, control. You're not just fed. You're baked into the story now. You leave behind the heated crust wars of the bakery district, the clamor still echoing in your ears like a badly tuned lyre, and wander toward the quieter side of the market, if there is such a thing in Rome. This street smells sharper, oilier. There's a tang in the air that hits the back of your throat before you can even spot its source. A stall with tall jugs lined in uneven rows comes into view. The vendor stands behind them with arms crossed, face shiny with sweat eyes, darting like he's daring someone to accuse him of something. You step closer. He uncorks a jar. The scent hits you like a lemon having an identity crisis, olive oil, heavy and thick, but with a strange undertone. A little rancid, a little grassy, a little like something that used to be good but got left in the sun too long. You try not to react, but the vendor sees your expression and shrugs. Came in yesterday. From Hispania. He doesn't sound convinced. Welcome to the Roman olive oil hustle. Oil wasn't just a kitchen staple, it was the kitchen staple. Used for cooking, preserving lighting, washing, and sometimes even payment. Good oil could make or break a meal. Bad oil, that could end friendships, or start wars depending on the guest list. You take a cautious finger dip and taste. It's acceptable. But the aftertaste clings to your tongue like a political scandal. You nod anyway. There were laws about this. Real ones. Romans had official inspectors called aediles who monitored markets for fraud. Bad weights spoiled food and, yes, counterfeit oil. Some vendors diluted pure oil with water or worse old oil gone cloudy and sour. Others tampered with measurements, selling short volumes or adding herbs to mask the stench of spoilage. Historians still argue how effective these inspections really were. Some say the aediles were dedicated public servants. Others believe many were just as greasy as the goods they oversaw. Either way, food fraud was common, and the public knew it. You step aside just in time to avoid a vendor flipping a sealed amphora upside down to prove nothing but pure first press. The stopper pops off. Oil splashes onto his tunic. You give him points for confidence. Next door, a man is grinding peppercorns in a stone bowl the size of your torso. Beside him, jars of spices, cumin, coriander, dill, even imported cinnamon and black pepper from India. He offers you a sniff. You lean in and sneeze so hard your sandals slide an inch back. He chuckles and offers you a sample of spiced lentil paste on a chunk of barley bread. It's peppery garlicky with a tiny kick that makes your eyebrows raise. Delicious and slightly suspicious. He winks, only the finest spices, no sawdust. You raise a brow. That's not just a joke. Some less savory vendors mixed flour with ground chalk. Spices were padded with powdered bark. Even garum Rome's beloved fish sauce could be diluted with water or thickened with rotting anchovies to fake age. It was all about margin and illusion. Across the square, a shouting match has broken out between a fig seller and a fruit inspector. The inspector is holding up a spoiled fig like it's a severed head. The vendor is swearing the sun was too strong this week. A crowd gathers. Wagers are placed. You keep walking. A woman under a canvas awning calls you over. She's selling sweet wine in clay flasks, but as she pours, she leans in and says, "Don't trust the purple jugs across the street. They color it with crushed lead flakes. Makes it sweeter." You blink. "Isn't that dangerous?" She grins. "Only if you drink too much or have kidneys." You decide not to ask how she still has hers. And yes, she's not lying. Some Roman winemakers used sapa, a reduced grape syrup that sometimes contained lead from the boiling pots. It enhanced sweetness, but slowly poisoned people over time. You sip her version instead. It's thick, fragrant, and tastes like plums wrapped in ambition. No metal undertones. Probably, as you drink, you catch the tail end of a heated debate between two merchants about fish freshness. One slams down a bucket. "This anchovy was caught yesterday." The other scoffs. "It walked here on its own then." A magistrate strolls by, flanked by two scribes. The vendors suddenly behave. Smiles, respectful bows, polite words. The moment he's gone, they go back to yelling. Food law enforcement in Rome wasn't constant. It ebbed and flowed with who was in charge, how full the grain silos were, and whether or not the local inspector had been bribed with a goose. You pause by a cart selling defrutum, that thick grape syrup again. This one's in tiny jugs sealed with wax. The vendor lets you dip a dried fig into it. You do. It's sweet, rich, cloying. Almost too much. Almost. She leans in. "I don't use ash or resin in mine," she whispers, unlike them. She points with her chin at a rival across the street who glares back like this is the start of an amphora-throwing feud. You nod, slowly chewing the fig. Because in Rome, it wasn't just what you ate. It was who you trusted to sell it. You finish licking the last of that grape syrup from your fingers, tacky sweet and possibly treasonous, depending on which stall you bought it from, and take a few steps toward the city's wealthier quarter. The stones here are smoother, the walls cleaner, the people louder and more powdered. You smell the feast before you see it. Roasted meats, wine-soaked fruits. Something floral, maybe lavender, maybe deceit. And then you see the villa. High walls, gilded gates, a courtyard full of laughter silk robes and the kind of decorative fountains that make your bank account sweat just by existing. Someone's throwing a convivium, a Roman elite banquet, and you, thanks to a friendly house servant who mistakes you for a minor cousin of someone important, are suddenly invited. You try not to look too shocked or hungry. Both are frowned upon. The atrium is packed. Not shoulder to shoulder like the marketplace, but draped elbow to reclining elbow on marble couches arranged in a U-shape. Slaves move like shadows, quietly laying dishes onto low tables, adjusting pillows, wiping spills before they even happen. This is Roman fine dining, and it's about to get weird. Your first course arrives on a silver tray, something jiggly and pink nested in vine leaves. You ask your neighbor, a senator's nephew with a voice like melted wax, what it is. Flamingo egg custard, he says, picking up his spoon with a flourish. You blink. He slurps. You cautiously taste. It's silky, slightly salty, with a faint aftertaste of should this exist, but it's expertly seasoned. And surprisingly, delicate. Elite Roman cuisine wasn't about comfort. It was about display, power, drama. If food didn't make you raise your eyebrows, or your eyebrows didn't raise someone else's glass, was it even worth eating? More dishes arrived, dormice again, but this time glazed with honey and stuffed with poppy seeds. Peacock roasted with cinnamon and sprinkled with gold flakes. A whole fish cooked in wine brought to the table still wearing an expression of mild betrayal. And then the centerpiece, a massive pig, stuffed with everything. You watch as the cook slices open its belly and outpours a cascade of songbirds, sausages, crab claws, and somehow figs. There are gasps, applause. Your jaw tries to unhinge in solidarity. This kind of meal didn't happen every day, of course. These were epulae opima, lavish feasts reserved for the wealthiest, the most ambitious, or the ones trying to show off how many provinces they could financially devour in one sitting. Historians still argue whether these feasts were more about pleasure or politics. Some say they were genuine indulgence. Others believe they were social battles where seating arrangements, drink ratios, and belch etiquette mattered more than anything actually on the plate. You glance around. One man's only nibbling fruit dipped in wine. Another is loudly devouring oysters and spitting the shells into a bronze bowl with gusto. Your host gestures for another amphora to be opened, this one labeled Falernian, one of Rome's most prized wines, aged decades and poured with the reverence of a religious ritual. You sip? It's strong. Really strong. It sings at the back of your throat like a philosophy student at his fourth symposium. You lean back on your cushion and exhale. A servant brings you a napkin soaked in rose water to wipe your hands. Another dabs your forehead. You let it happen. You've earned this moment. A poet stands and begins to recite a mildly obscene ode to pickled radishes. No one interrupts him. A lyre player adds dramatic chords between each stanza. Someone near you whispers, "He lost a bet last week." This is his punishment. You eat another songbird just to cope. It's absurd. It's glorious. It's Rome in edible form. Then comes dessert, not just a tray-in event. Glazed fruits carved into animals. Jelly molded like the Colosseum. A custard shaped like Neptune's trident. And in the center, a pie. Large, golden, suspiciously still. Until it's sliced open and a live dove flies out. Screams, laughter, applause. You blink. Someone hands you a slice of the now empty pie. It's sweet, fig and walnut, with a faint taste of bird panic. Your host beams. We spared no expense, he says. Next week's sea urchin pudding served in golden skulls. You nod like that makes sense. Your brain is no longer responsible for filtering anything. And as the feast continues, as more plates arrive, more wine is poured and more birds are released from increasingly improbable containers, you begin to realize this isn't about food anymore. It's theater, it's spectacle, it's a statement dressed in sauce and wrapped in gold leaf. And somehow, despite everything, you're not even surprised. You finally peel yourself off the banquet couch like an overstuffed fig trying to walk upright. Your tongue is still coated in honey and roasted memory. Somewhere behind you, a poet is still mid-verse about the tragic beauty of a grilled pear. You stagger out of the villa shoes barely on dignity long gone. The air outside is cool, now touched by dusk and the faint promise of indigestion. You think maybe it's time for something simpler. And so, As if the food gods have heard you, you find yourself in a quieter part of the city, near the ludus, the gladiator training grounds. You hear grunts, clangs, the rhythmic thud of fists on sandbags, and laughter. You round the corner, and there they are, half a dozen gladiators, bare-chested, muscle-bound, sweaty, lounging on crates and tearing into a meal that would make the banquet crowd snare. Barley mush, beans, a few chopped leeks. That's it. You blink. Hungry, one of them calls out, patting a space on the bench. You join them because why not? You're tired, you're full of peacock regrets, and the mush smells oddly good. He hands you a wooden bowl of Pols gladiatorius, the fuel of champions. It's bland, but warm, heavy, satisfying in a way that isn't flashy or feathered. This was the real Roman performance food. High carb, low cost, designed to bulk up the body, not impress a senator. The typical gladiator diet was mostly plant-based barley beans, legumes, dried fruits, and the occasional crumb of cheese or salted meat if the crowd was generous. Historians sometimes call them hordeari, barley men. Not very glamorous, but fitting. You watch as one gladiator pours a bit of vinegar into his bowl, stirs, then slurps it down like a champ. He grins, helps with the bruises. You copy him. It sharpens the flavor, cutting through the mush with a tang that wakes up your palate and possibly your ancestors. Nearby, a clay jug of diluted wine makes its rounds. No gold flakes, no perfume. Just slightly sour refreshment in a city built on sweat. And make no mistake, these men sweat. One of them shows you the palm of his hand, blistered and bandaged. Trained with a wooden sword today, he says. Tomorrow, real blades. He smiles like it's a gift. You glance at their gear stacked by the wall. Heavy helmets, iron greaves, a shield taller than you. These weren't Hollywood fighters. They were athletes, performers, survivors. The conversation turns to food quickly. One complains that the barley was undercooked. Another swears the beans gave him phantom pain. A third swears by a mixture of dried figs and goat cheese as the ultimate pre-fight snack. You ask if they ever eat meat. Only when someone dies, one jokes. The others laugh too easily. Truth is, gladiators did eat meat, but not as much as you'd think. Too expensive, too inconsistent. Their diet was built to sustain, not dazzle. Yet curiously, they also drank a concoction made from ashes. Yes, ashes. A drink made from plant ash, mixed with vinegar or water, believed to help with bone healing and muscle recovery. Historians still argue if it actually worked, or if it was ancient Jim Bro folklore, but the practice was real enough to leave residue in their bones. One of the younger fighters offers you a sip of his recovery drink. You take it. It's smoky, sour, slightly horrifying. You nod approvingly because you're at this point committed. They ask what you've eaten today. You tell them. Their eyes widen. Flamingo tongues, one gasps. You poor thing, another says deadpan. The oldest among them shrugs. I once ate a hedgehog cooked in clay. The clay cracked open with the spines inside. Got a mouthful of pain and protein. Everyone nods. No one is surprised. You hand back the ash jug. They wish you luck on your way. You walk off into the twilight with barley sitting comfortably in your gut and the sound of laughter behind you. Simple food, shared food, functional food. No peacocks, no applause, just enough fuel for the fight ahead. And for the first time today, your stomach doesn't question your life choices. You make your way down a narrow alley as night begins to bloom over Rome, the sky painted in hues of violet and smoke. You're full, but curiosity has a way of overriding stomach logic in this city. And right now, something strange, really strange, is calling to you. You follow a flickering oil lamp toward a quiet corner near the temple of Asclepius, Rome's patron of healing. The air here smells peculiar, earthy, musky, like wet herbs, old scrolls, and maybe expired courage. You step inside a cramped apothecary where shelves are stacked with jars of dried roots, fish scales, and liquids that shimmer in unnatural shades of green. A man in a long tunic with permanently arched eyebrows nods at you like he's been waiting your whole life. "You're just in time," he says, already stirring something thick and brown in a shallow pot. Poop wine is ready. You blink. "Come again. Don't worry," he adds, spooning the brew into a chipped clay cup. Only goat this time. You stare at the drink. You consider your dignity. Then you remember you once ate a dormouse stuffed with pine nuts. So you sip. It's earthy, bitter, slightly smoky. Not terrible, but definitely not going on your favorite beverage list. He grins, cleanses the spleen. Turns out ancient Roman medicine and food weren't always separate. In fact, many so-called treatments were edible, or drinkable, or at least survivable. Poop wine, yes, wine fermented or infused with animal dung, was prescribed for a variety of ailments. Goats, geese, even pigeons. If it pooped and breathed someone somewhere, probably steeped it in alcohol and called it a cure. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were ever truly consumed or mostly theoretical. The Medicina Plinii, a Roman medical text, reads like a cookbook for chaos, dried dog dung to treat nosebleeds, crushed earthworms for bruises, a boiled mouse for toothache. You glance at a shelf marked Inflammatio and find jars labeled lizard tail, old honey, and something that just reads bat crushed. You back away politely. Your host offers you a different remedy, a thick paste of dates ground, cumin, and vinegar. For stomach troubles, he says. You try it. It burns slightly, like revenge and raisins. Medical cuisine was a big deal in Rome. Wealthy households often kept personal doctors, and food was prescribed just like medicine. Figs for the bowels, lentils to dry up excess phlegm, honey for wounds and heartbreak, and of course, vinegar for just about everything else. You're handed another sample, a small loaf of bread soaked in wormwood wine. Good for bad dreams, the apothecary says, or causing them. Depends on the batch. You chew. It tastes like regret and dried grass. Nearby, another man is kneeling before a jar of pickled onions, whispering a prayer. You ask why. They keep away spirits, he says solemnly, especially those from spoiled fish. Not all Roman food as medicine was terrifying, though. Garlic was widely used for digestion strength and even courage. Soldiers ate it before battle, workers before long shifts, lovers before disappointment. You're offered a clove dipped in honey. You chew. It's pungent, sweet. Your breath could now conquer a small province. Excellent, the apothecary nods. You are ready for what he doesn't say. Outside, the streets are quieter now. Shadows stretch across cobblestones. A woman sits beside a barrel of dried herbs, braiding rosemary into rings. She offers you a sprig. For dreams, she says. Burn it under your bed. You take it, because at this point you'll believe anything. And then one final offer. A tiny clay vial. Oil of wolf tooth, the apothecary says. Rub it on the belly. Keeps envy away. You don't ask questions anymore. Romans lived in a world where food medicine and magic blurred constantly. If something grew, crawled, bled, or fermented, it could be used to heal, protect, or provoke. They ate to feel better, to stay brave, to sleep, to fight, to love, and sometimes to forget. You take one last look around the shop before stepping back into the night. Your breath smells like garlic. Your belly bubbles with goat wine. And somewhere inside you there's probably still a fig soaked in wormwood wine having an existential crisis. But your mind clear, calm, possibly cursed. Because this was Rome, and sometimes dinner came with side effects. You walk away from the apothecary shop in a daze, your breath capable of clearing alleyways and your stomach now operating as a kind of experimental cauldron. The streets are darker now, the sun all but gone, the oil lamps sputtering into life one by one. You're thinking maybe it's time to wind down. Rome disagrees, because just ahead you hear shouting laughter and the familiar smell of something burned, but not in a tragic way. In a come inside and eat your feelings way. You've stumbled upon a taberna, a Roman tavern, and it's alive. Inside, The air is thick with wine vapor, sweat, and gossip. The walls are smoke-stained, the wooden beams dark with age, and the floor sticky with things best left uninvestigated. You're greeted by a man with one eyebrow, two missing teeth, and a picture of something questionable. He nods. Pull up a stool. You look like you've been through a feast. You sit. The table's surface is scratched with names, crude drawings, and what you hope is just spilled lentil stew. Someone's playing dice in the corner. Someone else is already asleep on a bench, snoring like a sea god with sinus issues. A barmaid slams down a bowl in front of you. "How special?" she says. "Don't ask." "Naturally you do. Leftover meat," she replies. "Mostly goat. Some not." The stew is brown, salty, and filled with floating chunks that you hesitate to identify. But it's hot and hearty. And after the past 12 hours, your taste buds have surrendered all standards. You eat. It's not bad. There's garlic, a splash of vinegar, maybe leeks, and possibly a bone fragment from something with a grudge. Still, you keep going. It warms you from the inside out. Welcome to the working-class dinner table. Tavernas weren't just places to drink. They were the everyday Roman's living room, kitchen, newsstand, and therapy office, all rolled into one. Here, workers, soldiers, traders, and anyone with a few coins came to eat, drink, and decompress. The wine, weak, on purpose. Romans watered their wine to keep things civilized. The stronger stuff was saved for desperate nights and dramatic exits. The barmaid returns with a small dish of roasted chickpeas sprinkled with herbs and maybe ashes from whatever caught fire earlier. You pop a few in your mouth. Crunchy, salty, familiar. A man next to you rants about chariot teams. Green is cursed, he spits, pounding the table. Red has the best horses. You nod like you care. He keeps talking. Another man tries to sell you a small bottle of something he claims is moon-filtered wine. It's probably watered-down raisin juice, but the bottle's warm from being hidden under his cloak. You politely decline. The noise rises as someone starts singing in slurred Latin. A chorus joins in. It's vaguely melodic, definitely offensive, and clearly traditional. You tap your foot. Another plate appears, fried fish heads. You stare. The man across from you grins. Suck the eyes. That's where the flavor is. You pretend not to hear and focus on your wine. Tavernas served whatever they could, leftovers, odds and ends, scraps stewed into something edible. If it was cheap and didn't scream too loudly, it was food. Some even offered menus, written lists on wax tablets or scratched into walls. Not for the variety, mind you, but to let you know which version of fish you were getting tonight. Historians still argue about how sanitary these places were. The answer is probably not very. But they were affordable, comforting, and came with stories. You hear one now. An old sailor is describing a sea squid so large it swallowed a rowboat whole. Someone throws a chickpea at him. He doesn't stop. He adds that it burped up a dolphin. Another man recounts the time he drank spoiled vinegar wine and hallucinated Jupiter tap dancing on his windowsill. You believe him more than the squid guy. Someone spills a bowl. The dog underneath the table rejoices. You lean back, belly full, ears buzzing, heart content. This isn't fine dining. It's fine surviving. And that's what the tavern is for. A loaf of black bread makes the rounds. It's dense, chewy, better with wine, or dipped in the communal stew pot if you're brave. You are. You dunk. A man to your left says he once tasted garum made with eel heads. He looks proud. You look impressed. It's a bonding moment. Later, someone opens a jar of pickled garlic cloves and passes them around like candy. You pop one into your mouth and instantly remember every bad decision you've made in life. It's powerful, pungent. You chase it with warm wine and suddenly forget what shame is. The crowd thins. The song's slow. The barmaid extinguishes a few lamps. You look around. This, you realize, is the Rome no one paints on a fresco. The Rome of stew stains garlic breath and laughter with strangers. It's not elegant, but it's honest. And your bowl is empty. You step back into the night, your ears still ringing from off-key tavern songs, and your belly wobbling slightly from mystery stew and pickled garlic. The air is cooler now, scented faintly with chimney smoke and ripe figs. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays like it's filing a noise complaint with the gods. You take a deep breath, thinking you've tasted everything Rome has to offer. Wrong again. A sharp, biting chill hits your nose as you round the corner. Cold air, real cold, pouring out of a stall nestled between two shops. You blink. Did someone just sprinkle snow? You drift toward it, drawn by the crowd. And there, under a striped canopy, sits a wide stone basin filled with shaved ice piled high like a snowdrift in the middle of August. Beside it, a boy is furiously grating a block of frozen mountain ice with something that looks like a cheese grater and a sense of purpose. Next to him, a woman is ladling syrup, grape fig, maybe pomegranate over each frosty mound. You watch a little girl clutch her bowl of snow like it's the most magical thing she's ever held. She offers you a bite. You take it. Cold, sweet, tart. You feel your soul physically sigh with relief. Frozen desserts weren't common in Rome. They were rare and expensive. This wasn't some everyday snack. This was luxury on a spoon, the ice hauled from the Apennines or even the Alps, packed in straw and stored in underground pits called nivaria. Only the rich or the very lucky could afford to chill their food, let alone make edible snowballs. You buy a small bowl. It's topped with date syrup and crushed herbs. Maybe mint, maybe basil. Your tongue doesn't care. It's cold. It's delicious. It's worth every coin. And here's the best part. It's a show. People gather not just to eat, but to watch, to marvel at the shimmering flakes, to argue about syrup flavors, to speculate whether snow keeps you younger. One man insists it does. Another says it gives you gas. They both keep eating. Next to the stall, another vendor is making a kind of chilled fruit pudding. He pours fig puree into stone molds, sets them atop blocks of ice, and fans them until they firm up. When he unmolds one for a nearby customer, a soft plop is followed by applause. It wobbles proudly. Someone asks if it's enchanted. You take notes. Further down, someone else is selling chilled wine. Not icy, just cool enough to make you raise your eyebrows in delighted surprise. It's steeped with rose petals and a hint of honey. You sip slowly, savoring the balance of cold and floral. You overhear two noble women debating whether cool drinks are barbaric. One says yes. The other sips her wine and mutters, "Then I'll die a barbarian." You silently toast to her. Historians still argue about how widespread Roman frozen treats really were. Some say they were reserved for emperors and upper-class banquets. Others argue that the growing ice trade made them more accessible in large cities, especially in the hotter months when public tempers boiled faster than lentils. What's certain is this cold food in a hot city was a small miracle, and the Romans who saw omens in birds and fortunes in fig seeds knew how to appreciate small miracles. A vendor calls you over to try snow cream, a blend of milk, honey, and shaved ice stirred together until smooth. You sip. It's sweet, creamy, and almost too good for this century. It tastes like the childhood you never had in a time you never lived in. You lean back against a stone pillar, letting the chill work through your bones. Nearby, someone's child drops their bowl. The ice scatters. Everyone gasps like it's a national tragedy. The vendor gives them another. No charge. Redemption by syrup. A man tries to convince the crowd that adding vinegar to the snow improves digestion. He is universally ignored. You feel safer for it. You try one last treat before moving on, iced melon slices dipped in grape must. Each bite is crisp, juicy, and vaguely divine. You're starting to understand why emperors had ice cellars guarded like gold. You step away from the stall with numb fingers and a grin. Your belly might be full of fermented fish sauce, barley, and regret, but now finally it has balance. Cold has met hot, sweet has met sour. Rome has met dessert that won't melt on your way home. And as you walk beneath the stars, licking the last drops of syrup from your fingers, you think, Rome may not have had refrigerators, but it sure knew how to chill. Your hands are still pleasantly numb from that miracle bowl of ancient Roman snow, when the hush of early night is shattered by a sudden cheer that echoes across the rooftops. You pause, ears perked. Then another shout. Then a roar. You squint toward the direction of the noise, and then it hits you like a runaway chariot. Chariot races. The Circus Maximus. The grandest stadium in Rome. Half sport, half ritual, half guaranteed traffic disaster. You follow the crowd. Yes, you are definitely not alone, flowing like a river of tunics and wine breath toward the great oval. And just like modern stadiums, there's one thing you can't miss on your way in snacks. Vendors line the entrance, hollering louder than the fans. Their trays are piled with dried fruits, roasted nuts, honey-drenched cakes, and something that looks like a pretzel if pretzels were invented by someone extremely angry at dough. You grab a cone of roasted chickpeas, still warm and crusted with salt and ground coriander. They rattle in your hand like ancient Roman trail mix. You pop one in your mouth. Crunch. Heat. Perfection. You're not the only one. Everyone's munching something: figs, sesame rolls, skewered dates, almonds baked with honey until they crack between your teeth. You buy a small slab of date cake wrapped in fig leaf. It's dense, sticky, energizing. A Roman protein bar. Historians have long suspected that chariot race days doubled as snackapaloozas. The events could last hours, sometimes a full day, and sitting through multiple heats in the sun called for fortification. Whether you were team red, white, blue, or green, one thing was certain: cheering worked up an appetite. A man walks by selling honeyed hazelnuts in small woven baskets. He chants his pitch like a bard, sweet as Venus, hard as Mars. You buy a handful. He bows dramatically. You duck into the stadium and find your seat well more like a spot on a crumbling stone tier that's seen thousands of butts before yours. The track below glows faintly in the torchlight. The 4 teams are preparing their horses. The crowd is buzzing. Someone's already lost money and started crying. Beside you, a woman unwraps a bundle of stuffed grape leaves. She hands you one. You bite in. Rice herbs a little ground lamb. Portable. Filling. Delicious. Stadium food. Roman edition. Vendors roam the steps with trays of hot drinks, wine with herbs, and warm water mixed with fig vinegar. You take a cup of the latter. It's sour, but strangely refreshing. Romans called it posca, a common drink among soldiers and workers, perfect for days like this. Suddenly trumpets blare. The gates open. The horses bolt. And the crowd erupts. You shout, you cheer. Your fig cake crumbles down your tunic, but you don't care. The driver in red is leaning dangerously into the turn. The man beside you spills wine on his sandals from sheer excitement. Somewhere nearby, someone throws a dried apricot in triumph. It hits a vendor who doesn't flinch. The tension builds. Dust kicks up. You almost forget you're holding a skewer of roasted quail eggs dipped in salt and vinegar until you finish them. You buy a second round of chickpeas and share them with the boy next to you. He can't be older than 10 and already knows all the betting odds. He asks who you're rooting for. You say whichever one hasn't crashed yet. He laughs. That's green. They crash anyway. Screams. Gasps. Then applause because the driver rolls back up onto his feet and salutes like it was all part of the plan. A slave runs out and hands him a skin of water. You kind of want one too. The woman with the grape leaves hands you another. Romans didn't eat at races just to survive the heat. They ate to celebrate, to mark the moment, to connect with strangers through snacks and screaming. Food made even the blood and dust taste like glory. You spot someone selling dried plums rolled in salt. You buy a pair and chew thoughtfully as the next race begins. A vendor walks by yelling, "Stuffed onions." Still warm. You pause, but then no. Even you have limits, or maybe not. You buy one. It's savory, slightly sweet, filled with barley and bits of meat. You hum with approval. The final race is the wild 1-6 team's loose rules high stakes. Someone bets their sandals. Someone else bets their goat. A third person just screams Falernian forever and flings a cup into the air. The noise reaches a pitch that buzzes in your teeth. You drop your last nut into your mouth and shout with the crowd. And as the chariots round the final bend and the winning team surges ahead, you realize something. You didn't just watch a race. You ate it, the dust from the circus. Maximus still clings to your skin. Your sandals are coated in dried grape must and chickpea crumbs, and your voice is hoarse from cheering for a team you couldn't even name an hour ago. You stagger down from the stone steps along with the rest of Rome's exhausted and overstimulated. The torches along the street flicker low now. It's late, but Rome isn't done. Rome never sleeps. It just eats quieter. You wander into a side alley and nearly collide with a teenage boy weaving through the crowd, a wooden tray strapped around his shoulders. On it, 2 steaming bowls covered in cloth, balanced with a precision that suggests he's done this dance before. Out of the way, he calls not unkindly and ducks under a laundry line. His tray wobbles. He doesn't break stride. Behind him, a younger boy follows with a bag of flatbread tucked under one arm and a clay bottle of something steaming and fragrant. You've just met Rome's food delivery system. In a city without scooters, smartphones, or even sidewalks that weren't being used for donkey parking, the Romans still managed to deliver hot food across crowded streets with a speed that would make modern drivers sweat. Slaves, servants, and hired boys ran meals from kitchen to client, threading through the chaos with practiced agility and no health code violations in sight. You follow them. How can you not? They duck into a grand insula, a multi-story apartment building cracked and leaning ever so slightly. The older boy knocks twice. A woman answers, takes the tray, sniffs approvingly, and drops a few coins into his pouch. The boys vanish again, already off to their next stop. Nearby, another pair carries a basket of covered dishes up a stairwell, grumbling about how Senator Flavius never tips. You catch a whiff of garum lentils and roasted nuts, late-night snack or last-minute dinner. In Rome, there was no distinction. Romans didn't all cook at home, especially in crowded insulae, where fire hazards were real and kitchens were rare. Many relied on local popinae and thermopolia to prepare food for pickup or delivery. Slaves or hired runners made regular routes carrying pots wrapped in cloth to keep them warm, balancing amphorae of wine in hand-woven baskets. Historians still argue how organized these food deliveries were. Some suggest informal systems, others believe more elite households kept their own kitchen runners, much like a modern personal chef, who also happens to sprint. You pass a trio of delivery boys resting on a low wall, chewing roasted chickpeas and sipping watered wine. One of them rubs his feet. Another counts his tips. The youngest is asleep, a fig roll still clutched in his hand. You keep moving and pass a vendor loading hot dishes into wooden compartments stacked on a large tray. He sprinkles fresh herbs onto baked barley cakes, drizzles them with spiced oil and whistles for a runner. A man in a wool cloak hands over a scroll with an address, just an intersection, and a name. The vendor nods. It's all very matter-of-fact. Just business. Just hot food on the move. You decide to try one of those barley cakes for yourself. The vendor hands it over in waxed linen. It's warm, fragrant. The outside is crisp. Inside, soft barley mixed with herbs, cheese, and possibly the soul of a particularly content goat. You chew as you walk, passing others doing the same, guards on duty, doormen, street performers, counting coins. Rome moved at night, quietly, greedily. At one corner, a woman distributes slices of cold chicken wrapped in vine leaves. She presses one into your hand. "Delivery cancelled," she says with a wink. You eat it without question. It's lemony, tender, possibly divine. Another boy runs past with a flask of warm Posca vinegar water and a bag of fruit pastries. His sandals slap the stone in rhythmic bursts. His footwork is better than most charioteers. You spot two women sitting on a doorstep sharing a small dish of olives and wine-soaked pears. They nod at you, lifting their cups. Midnight supper, one says. Best time of day. You believe her. The streets slowly settle. Vendors pack up. The last deliveries go out. You pass a final pair of runners sitting under an archway, passing a dish of lentils back and forth, taking turns wiping the edge of the bowl. No fuss. No fine plates. Just food. Fast, warm, and necessary. You sit near them with your barley cake. One offers you a sip of their wine. You accept. It's tart, cheap, perfect. You realize in this moment you're sharing more than a meal. You're sharing the machinery of Rome, the quiet system that fed 1,000,000 mouths before sunrise. A city that understood appetite never sleeps. And as your last bite disappears, the youngest runner curls up beside his tray and falls asleep, crumbs still on his chin. You let out a slow breath, lean against the stone wall, and smile. Even in the empire of excess, it's the simple deliveries that hold it all together. The sky's a deeper black, now stitched with stars, and the faint orange glow of oil lamps left burning for travelers still wandering home. Your legs ache, your stomach sways like a cargo ship, and you could swear. Your breath still smells like fried chickpeas and disappointment. But Rome has one more layer to peel back before you rest. You drift toward the temple quarter, not for worship, but for a strange market you've heard whispers about all day. A place where food and faith mix, and where recipes are written in prayers and curses. You arrive at what looks like a modest clearing beside a crumbling shrine. A few low tables, clay bowls, faded cloths tied to tree branches. No signs, no prices, just symbols. A woman kneels at one corner, whispering over a pot of lentils. She stirs slowly with a sprig of rosemary in one hand, and what looks suspiciously like an eagle's feather in the other. You hesitate. She looks up. "Come to eat," she asks. You shrug. Sort of. She smiles. "Then eat, but know what you're swallowing." She ladles a spoonful of something steaming into a shallow bowl. Lentils, garlic, mustard seed, maybe bay leaf. You taste. It's surprisingly normal. "Good for the soul," she says. "And bad luck. Both." Turns out this is sacred cooking. Magical cooking. Ritual cooking. Rome wasn't just ruled by emperors and senators. It was ruled by belief. Superstition. The sense that a certain herb could change your fortune or a badly timed bite could bring ruin. Food wasn't just food. It was power. You spot another woman lighting a small fire under a pan of barley and honey. She murmurs a phrase too soft to catch and stirs counterclockwise. "To forget an old love," someone nearby whispers. The dish smells like closure and cinnamon. At the edge of the circle, a man offers a small biscuit wrapped in fig leaf. "For protection," he says. "Eat it before travel." You take it. You chew. It's nutty, dry, but oddly comforting. There were foods the Romans believed could heal, like onions roasted with salt to ease swelling or honey mixed with vinegar to draw out sadness. Others were feared. Lentils were sacred to some, avoided by others. Eggs signified rebirth. Garlic warded off evil spirits and occasionally dinner guests. Historians still debate how deeply Romans believed these culinary superstitions, but inscription scrolls and even cursed tablets suggest the line between the kitchen and the temple was paper thin. A girl offers you a drink of water steeped in mint and lavender. "For clear dreams," she says. You take a sip. It's floral soft, like drinking silence. A man across from you breaks a loaf of dark bread in half, sprinkles it with ash, and places one piece at the base of a statue. He eats the other in solemn silence. You ask the woman beside you what it means. He's asking the dead to stay quiet. You don't ask for more details. There are cakes shaped like snakes used in rituals for healing. There are poppy seed rolls meant to invite peaceful sleep. You're given one without asking. "Eat it whole," they say. Or the dream breaks. You do as instructed. The flavor is subtle, sweet, soft, earthy. As you chew, the hum of the market dims. the smells of garum firewood and vinegar are replaced with something more ancient laurel. Smoke. Oregano rubbed into prayer. Someone nearby starts chanting softly over a pot of boiling milk. A second voice joins, then a third. It doesn't feel strange. It feels like lullaby. Food wasn't just flavor here, it was fate. You realize that. And it wasn't just about magic either. Some dishes were reserved for gods, others for the dead. Some foods weren't allowed on certain days, others were required. Dates, figs, eggs, simple offerings meant to carry messages across divine thresholds. You watch a woman gently crack an egg over a bowl of flour, and Honey whisper a name and slide the mixture into a small clay oven. She lights a sprig of thyme, waves the smoke toward the stars, and then sits back and waits. You do too. Eventually, someone offers you a piece of honey cake dusted with poppy and ground hazelnut. This one's just for peace, they say. You eat. And for the first time in hours, your mind quiets. The fire pops. The wind carries the faint sound of a lyre. No one speaks. Not because there's nothing to say, but because there's nothing that needs saying. You're not just full. You're settled. And in the city of noise fire and fish sauce, that's its own kind of miracle. The embers from the sacred hearth glow faintly as you step away. Your thoughts slower, now your breath deeper. The street ahead is almost empty. The crowds have thinned. The yelling vendors have all gone quiet. Rome sleeps or pretends to. Your sandals scuff softly as you walk along a narrow road toward the city's edge. You're not sure where you're going anymore. You only know your feet want to keep moving. And then the smell returns. Not perfume, not spice, not vinegar or burnt bread. Just smoke, wet wool, and the faint tang of sweat over iron. You look up. A line of soldiers passes quietly through the gate. Dusty, silent, faces carved by exhaustion. Their cloaks are stiff with travel, their sandals caked in red earth. They don't talk. They just march slow, deliberate toward the nearest barracks. And now, your last stop tonight, the castrum Rome's military camp. Not the polished garrisons in marble cities, but the kind with low walls, smoky fires, and men too tired to salute. You follow the scent to a squat cooking tent where a handful of soldiers sit around a low flame. They glance up, nod. One gestures at a pot and says, "Hungry." You sit. They pass you a dish without ceremony, a slab of buccalatum hardtack. Hard, dry, nearly flavorless unless you're starving or half asleep. You bite. It tries to fight back. You chew harder. Eventually it surrenders. This was soldier food. Simple, practical, durable. It needed to survive the march. You needed to survive eating it. Another man pours warm water over the biscuit, softening it. He stirs in some vinegar, adds crushed garlic, a pinch of cumin. Suddenly, it's not just food, it's soup. You taste it again. Better. They share dried dates, hard cheese olives that have seen better seasons, and a small pot of pulse, that ever-present barley mash. It's thick, filling, comforting somehow when eaten under open stars. The camp is quiet. No shouts, no speeches. Just spoons tapping wood and the sound of someone sharpening a blade behind you. One man pulls a packet from his bag. It rattles. He opens it carefully, salted pork. They all stare like he's opened a treasure chest. He slices it thin shares without needing to be asked. You get a piece. It's salty rich, almost too much after so many lentils. You eat it slowly, respectfully. They drink vinegar water, posca, passed around like a prayer. No one talks politics. No one complains. They're too tired for that. Food isn't a luxury here. It's a pause. You ask how long they've marched. 4 days, one says. Rained twice. Slept standing. Horses stole our figs. You don't know if he's joking. No one laughs. Still you stay. Because something about eating with soldiers beneath the stars in a city that never really stops moving feels honest. These were the last mouths Rome fed. The ones far from feasts and flamingo tongues. Far from vendors and spiced wines, they ate what traveled, what lasted, what didn't poison you if left in the sun for 2 days. Historians still argue how nutritious a legionary's diet really was. Some say it was balanced enough. Others point to deficiencies, parasites, and vitamin-starved rations. But what's clear is that it was enough to fuel conquest, or at least to keep the empire stitched together. And now, as the soldiers begin to settle down, wrapping themselves in cloaks, poking the dying fire, whispering stories with words worn smooth by miles, you feel your body finally give in. The food is finished. Your stomach, long abused, is calm. And Rome, she exhales. Because beneath all the shouting, the roasting, the fermenting, the honey and the ash and the fish guts and the barley, was this: people eating together, quietly. Wind down 300 words. Now you sit in the hush of the Roman night. The campfire's glow fades slowly, its last flickers, casting long shadows against stone and tent cloth. The voices soften, just a hum of breath and shifting cloaks. Above you, the stars hang low and quiet, ancient and unmoved. The warmth of the soldier's stew still lingers in your chest, the last hint of vinegar and barley tucking you in from the inside. You close your eyes. You can still feel the rhythm of the city, its ovens cooling, its jars sealed for morning, its streets swept by silence. There's no more cheering, no more slicing, no more bargaining, just the stillness of a city that has eaten well, laughed much, argued about fish sauce, and somehow come to rest. The smells are faint now, baked bread and olive oil, clinging like a memory. A breeze stirs the hem of your tunic. You shift slowly against a stone wall still warm from the day. And now, so gently let the city drift from you. Let the crackling flames go quiet. Let the footsteps fade. Let the last taste of date syrup soften in your memory. You've walked through her kitchens, her streets, her stalls and temples and taverns. You've broken bread with emperors and delivery boys. And now, with your body full and your thoughts softening like dough, it's time. Time to let it all go, to lie back, to close your eyes, to sleep. Rome will still be here in the morning. But tonight, she sleeps with you. Hey guys, tonight we're wandering back in time, to a world of sandals, slapping stone, smoky bread ovens, coughing soot into the sky, and a city that never seemed to stop eating, shouting, or building statues of itself. You're walking the cobbled streets of ancient Rome, probably barefoot, let's be honest, because your cheap sandals snapped an hour ago and you're hungry. Not gourmet hungry, more like, what can I eat with 1 sestertius and a prayer, hungry. You drift past rows of market stalls under patchy linen awnings. The air is warm, but the shade smells like goat. Olives glisten in open baskets glopped in oil. A nearby vendor waves a pan of chestnuts at you, his toga halfway falling off. To your left, there's a brazier with something sizzling and possibly twitching on a spit. Welcome to ancient Rome's snack scene, where the food is sometimes incredible, sometimes inedible, and always at least mildly suspicious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from a far-off town, or maybe just your couch in Boise, drop your location and the current time in the comments. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, tempted by smells, sweet and savory. This isn't Rome in its golden age of marble and myth. This is the working Rome, the city of butchers, bakers, and slightly intoxicated fishmongers. Street vendors holler in Latin and Greek, mixing prices with insults. Try the sausage. It's fresher than your haircut, one calls. You don't take it personally. A stall ahead boasts trays of liboum, a spongy little cheese bread that smells like honey and sheep. It's warm. You take a bite. It's slightly gritty, but that could just be the air. Here's the thing. Roman street food wasn't just for the poor, it was the great equalizer. Wealthy men might dine on peacock tongue at night, but midday they were still scarfing down honey nuts from the same vendor as the bricklayers. And you're You're now chewing something they called globuli deep-fried cheese balls, coated in honey and poppy seeds. Sweet hot and honestly a choking hazard. You pass by a stall selling meritum, a kind of garlicky cheese, spread mashed with herbs and olive oil. The seller lets you dip a crust of day-old bread into the mixture. It's pungent, like heartbreak and armpits, but weirdly addictive. You ask what's in it, and he just smiles with 3 teeth and says, "Love." You keep walking. Your next stop is a vendor with a flat stone slab and a fire pit oven. He's making flatbread, fast-slapping dough down, flipping it with a stick. A child helps him sprinkle the tops with sesame seeds. The bread is sold hot and fast, crispy on the edges, soft in the middle, and only occasionally blackened beyond hope. This was the Roman thermopolium culture in action, street-side hot food counters, often embedded right into the walls of buildings. Think ancient Taco Bell, but with slightly more shouting. Historians still argue whether these were primarily for the lower classes, or if they just thrived in crowded cities where home kitchens were rare. Either way, you find yourself lingering outside, once sniffing the steam curling from clay pots. Inside, a bubbling mix of lentils, barley, chopped onions, and what might be bits of fish. The cook ladles some into a terracotta bowl, passes it to you with a burnt wooden spoon. It's warm, hearty, and vaguely anchovy-adjacent. Probably spiked with garum, the omnipresent fermented fish sauce that somehow made its way into everything from soups to desserts. Garum, by the way, is a whole thing. Made from rotted fish guts left in the sun and stirred like a witch's brew, it was expensive, pungent, and probably smelled like the devil's foot. But Romans adored it. Rich or poor, they used garum like we use ketchup or ranch, liberally and without remorse. You try to smile as the tangy salt smacks the back of your throat. Overhead, laundry flaps on lines between tenement buildings. A child is throwing something sticky off a balcony. You step to the side just in time. Welcome to Rome, population over 1 million at its peak. Many of them hungry, tired, and wearing sandals with questionable arch support. The streets are chaos. Mule carts rattle by. Someone's shouting about missing chickens. You duck into an alley where another vendor is selling candied nuts, almonds glazed in honey and rolled in crushed herbs. It tastes like dessert and medicine had a child. A woman in a saffron-dyed shawl leans against a pillar, munching on something you can't quite identify. She catches your eye and shrugs. "We call it street surprise," she says. You believe her. Still, not everything was so mysterious. Romans loved dates both for eating and awkward romantic strolls. The fruit was sweet, chewy, and sometimes stuffed with pine nuts or dipped in wine. You try one. It's sticky, but in a comforting way. Like ancient trail mix, your stomach begins to settle. The food is simple, but satisfying. You've tasted the backbone of the empire, the grains, the fruits, the fish sauces of questionable legality. You pass by a poet reciting verses in exchange for flatbread. His toga is frayed and his metaphors are questionable, but he earns a few laughs. A breeze stirs the dust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. You pause near a fountain, wipe your hands on your tunic, and lean against a sun-warmed wall. And you realize junk food, or not this city, is alive. Not with the nobility you read about in textbooks, but with the thrum of daily hunger, laughter, sweat, and spice. And yes, possibly salmonella. But what's a little gastrointestinal risk when the figs are this ripe?